All right, Jeff Elgin. How you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. How about you, Wes?
Fantastic. Look, I really appreciate you dropping into the podcast with us today. When I decided to do a podcast, you were at the very top of a pretty long list of people that I knew I wanted to have join me as a guest on the podcast. So I'm glad that this has finally become a reality. I really appreciate you joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
So, as I mentioned in the introduction, you're the founder and CEO of FranChoice, which is a franchise consulting network that I'm also a part of now. Um, for the audience, though, listening in that maybe is not as familiar with you, share a little bit of your background and your experience, career-wise, and in particularly when it comes to franchising. And how did you ultimately get to the point where you started an entire network of franchise consultants, which is now one of the leading, franchise consulting networks out there today?
Well, as you could probably imagine, I came from an accounting background because what else would you come from if you were going to go into franchise development or a sales career? And
Sure.
and I worked as out of college as an auditor for about 2.5 years, and it was excruciating. I really disliked it a lot, and then I left that to go into life insurance sales,
Hmm.
and where I had a very successful career for a few years, and even though the career was successful, it wasn't very fulfilling because just like everybody else, I don't like life insurance agents. I mean, it was just I really felt uncomfortable in that
Yeah.
role. I wanted to get into something else, and so I had a fellow that approached me to invest money in an operation that he was going to start with some franchises in the
Mm.
video store rental business in the early 80s. And I looked at the numbers and everything and thought, well, if it's really that good, instead of investing money with him, I'll just go do it myself. And so I did. I became a multi-unit franchisee in a franchise system. And I'm pretty confident I was the worst franchisee in the history of franchising. Didn't follow any of the recommendations of the franchisor. I was just way too smart for that and full of myself. And as a result, the business it didn't do nearly as well as it should have if
Mm.
absolutely anybody else would have been running it. But I was very fortunate because somebody even dumber than me came along and bought it from me and got me out of retail operations, which was not my strength. And then I went to work with the franchisor in franchise development. That was my first experience in that. And I've
Okay.
gone through a few companies since then, working with them directly. And in 1990, went to work with a company called Great Clips, which I think most everybody's heard of now. They have 4 or 5,000 units around the United States. At the
Partially
time I
thanks
went
to you,
there,
right?
yeah, at the time I went there, they had literally 150 units growing by about one a year.
Wow.
Uh, Wonderful system, great people, great support, great marketing, great everything. They didn't have the first clue how to recruit franchisees. And
Mm.
so they brought me in to do that. And by the time I left 8 years later, we had about 1,500 units growing by about 300 a year.
That's
And
amazing.
so it had just taken off. And of course, it's continued to grow since then.
Yeah.
Marvelous people, a wonderful experience at that company. I learned so much about franchising and how to do it the right way because of all the people that I got to work with there. And after I left FranChoice, I decided that I love this idea of being able to help people by representing multiple brands.
Hmm.
Because in Great Clips, just like in any other franchise company, you've experienced it yourself. You meet some great people that would be wonderful franchisees, but they're just not the right fit for your particular concept. They really
That's
need
right.
to find something else. And it was so frustrating to not be able to help those people because I was just representing one brand that
Yeah.
I thought, well, what if we were representing 100 brands? What if we were representing a large number across an entire spectrum? So no matter what somebody was looking for, as long as it was reasonable, we could find some companies that potentially would match up very well with them. And that was the basis of FranChoice. And I started a prototype office with another fellow, Jeff Sieber, that you know, back
Hmm.
in 1999. And we ran that for about a year and a half. And then had a lot of success. So we formed FranChoice and started that. Now it's been just over 20 years ago,
Yeah.
and have placed literally thousands, tens of thousands of franchise agreements since then, and helped a lot of people realize their dreams.
Well, and that's what it's all about. And, helping people realize their dreams. And I mean, as you mentioned, I've experienced too. I've worked for some great franchisors that have fantastic business opportunities, and I've worked in development for them. But yeah, they're not a good fit for everyone that you end up speaking to. And that was always something that was a bit frustrating for me because I developed some good relationships with these amazing people. They clearly were cut out to be business owners, but for one reason or another, the particular brand I was representing was not a good fit for them. And it was frustrating for me because I was kind of at a point where I couldn't really help them beyond that point. That was kind of the end of the road as far as me being able to continue to work with them and help them. That was a big driver for me wanting to get into consulting as well, because now I have the flexibility to really get to know the people that I'm working with and then help them find a business that's the best match for them. So, I love the story. I want to circle back to some of your experience in franchise development for just a minute. So, when you went to work for Great Clips doing development, was that your first company doing development, or had you had a couple of other stops along the way before going to Great Clips?
Well, yes, I started in franchise development in the
Okay.
video rental store business, and worked in there for 2 or 3 years until the franchisor sold. They
Hmm.
sold the company to outfit in Philadelphia, and I didn't want to move to Philadelphia. So
Right.
then I worked with a company in the pizza business for a while, and that was very interesting and but successful. And then I was recruited to move back to Minneapolis and work with Great Clips.
So, what would you say you did differently coming into Great Clips to get the type of results that you got? Because, I mean, they literally experienced exponential growth while you were there. And as you've mentioned, I mean, fantastic leadership at the top of the company, great system, great business opportunities. So, all of that was kind of in place, but they hadn't been adding new franchises at anywhere close to the rate that they did while you were there. So, what do you think it was that you did differently to get those type of results?
Well, the challenge at Great Clips, the first two companies that I worked with, people were attracted to. The video rental business was red hot. Everybody wanted to go into it. Sorry about that.
That's fine.
My phone just rang, so I'll start that answer over again so you can make an edit cut. So the experience at Great Clips was different than it had been at the other companies because the other companies I worked with actually attracted people. People
Right.
wanted to go into the video rental store business. God darn it.
It's no big
Um,
deal.
okay, just a second here. I got to figure out how to.
If you need to take it, take it. If it's
No,
an
no. It's
important
a
call.
junk. It's a junk call. I get those darn things.
They're persistent as hell.
Okay, sorry about that, editor. We're gonna make you work a little harder on this
That's
one.
all right. He's
So,
going to earn his money on this one.
oh man. Okay, so let me see what was. Oh, so the experience I had at Great Clips was really quite different than the experience I had at the other companies because the other companies' franchises were attracted to people.
Yeah.
People wanted to go into the video store business. They wanted to learn about going into the pizza business. Everybody's attracted to food. Well, absolutely no one is attracted to the haircutting business.
Right.
And particularly because we were looking for franchisees that were experienced business people. We were
Hmm.
looking for franchisees that were well capitalized and wanted to manage managers. We were selling an executive style of franchise, and
Yep.
rather than trying to recruit people who knew how to cut hair that wanted to run a beauty salon.
Sure.
That was not our prototype. So what I had to do there, the challenge was to figure out how do I attract those kind of people to an opportunity based on cutting hair. And the answer was that we developed all kinds of things. We put on seminars in local markets and did other things to basically put a message out in front of people that would make them look at the opportunity with an open mind, look at it in terms of the characteristics of the opportunity rather than the product or service that was being delivered. And since we started FranChoice, we have now spent 20 years doing the same thing with lots and lots of businesses that people may not be attracted to initially because of the product or service that's being
Right.
delivered. But frankly, when they look at the business opportunity, when they look at the lifestyle of the franchisee, when they look at the economics of the opportunity, they're very attracted to it.
Yeah.
They just have to get past whatever the product or service happens to be. And that was the case at Great Clips.
Yeah, and I know I've heard you say several times because a lot of the kind of pushback you may have gotten initially from a candidate was, well, this is not the sexiest business in the world. And I think I've heard you say several times you kind of had a patented response that you had for that. Do you remember what that was?
I do indeed. And I've used it on Fox News and other places. I spell sexy M-O-N-E-Y. And that's what my focus is when I look at sexy businesses. There are lots of businesses that seem very attractive on the surface to people, but they are hard businesses to
Mm-hmm.
succeed in, and they don't make much money.
Yep.
Well, I'll tell you what, most franchisees, new franchisees that get into business, want a business that will be financially successful, and they want one that will create a lifestyle that they'll be happy in.
Yep.
So that's what we focus on, not the product or service, but the lifestyle and the economic opportunity and things like that, because that's what makes people happy in the long run.
Absolutely. And it's the right way to think about it, but it's counterintuitive for a lot of people when they begin a process such as investigating different franchise opportunities. And, a lot of times, whatever the sexiest business out there may be, it could be kind of a trend, right? I mean, the video rental stores, for example, that was, I'm sure, a very hot business at that time. But then, other disruptors came along in the form of different types of technology, ultimately making those businesses irrelevant, right? Where some of the less sexy businesses, they're going to be in demand just as much 10 years from now as they are today. And that's an
Sure.
important thing to be aware of when you're investigating a franchise business. And I experienced that myself when I was doing development for Shelf Genie, where my wife and I are franchisees now. Not the sexiest business in the world. We do custom shelving, right? And I've used this example numerous times on the podcast, but and we had the same challenge as you had at Great Clips, because the type of franchisee that we were really trying to attract, we were looking for someone with a high level of business acumen that has the ability to come in and develop a team and scale a business. But at surface level, the types of franchisees that were really a good fit for that business, they would gloss right over Shelf Genie, because they'd look at it and say, well, I don't know anything about shelving. How am I going to be able to get into a shelving business? I'm not handy. And it's really helping them understand what their role as an owner is designed to be in that particular business model. And once they understood that, and once they understood the simplicity of the business, the resources that we had in place, a lot of ongoing support designed to take critical yet time consuming aspects of managing the business off their plate, a light bulb would kind of go on, and they'd be like, okay, now I see why this could be a good fit for me. But at Shelf Genie, it's why we really had to focus on developing good relationships with franchise consultants, because where a lot of franchise brands might be able to run a variety of internet ads to create interested candidates, we really relied on consultants that could help candidates understand why they should take a closer look at a business like Shelf Genie. So for me, I think having that experience was invaluable for me now as a consultant, because again, that's one of the first conversations I have with a potential candidate that I'm going to work with is, are you going to be able to keep an open mind coming into this process? Because if you don't, we could very likely overlook some opportunities that in reality would be a fantastic fit for you. So
Well, I
that's
totally agree.
so, and I want to circle back because I just want to make sure that we don't miss this. Eh, Going back just briefly to your experience in life insurance sales, I've heard you tell a story a few times that I think would be awesome to share here on the podcast. And I believe you had a mentor in the life insurance business, if I'm remembering correctly. And you were kind of talking to him about wanting to set some pretty lofty goals and how to go about accomplishing those goals. And so he kind of gave you a challenge in order to help you do that. Do you remember this story? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do indeed. And throughout my entire career, I have been so fortunate to have mentors and trainers and other people that have helped me so much in terms of learning things. Bill O'Hearn was my mentor in the life insurance business, and a giant of a man. He's no longer with us, but I still, until when he died, we'd talk regularly on the phone, and just a great guy. Well, roll the tape back quite a ways, and keep in mind this was a long time ago, but even though I was successful in the business, I had never made more than $30,000 or $40,000 in a year. And $30,000 or $40,000 back in the '70s was big money.
Yeah, a
And I
lot
mean,
more than it
I'm
is
in my
today.
20s at this point, and it'd be like somebody in their 20s making $250,000 today or something like that.
Yeah.
But I wanted more, and so I was talking to Bill O'Hearn, my mentor, and about goal setting and trying to set goals and everything. I said, well, I want to make $100,000 in a year, and which was just unheard of. It was like you saying, I want to make $1 million in a year or something.
Yeah.
But anyway, he said, okay, great. Well, and we talked about it, and I put a plan together on kind of how I was going to do it and everything. And then he looked at me one day and he said, Jeff, I just don't get a sense of commitment from you that's strong enough to believe that you're going to achieve this goal. I think, what you need to do is you need to make a sign of your commitment. You need to do something that reminds you every day of your commitment and keeps you focused. And so I thought about that. I thought, okay, fine. If there's two things I don't like in life, the first one is getting up early in the morning.
Yep.
At that time, I'm an early riser now, but getting up early in the morning or taking a cold shower. And so
Yeah.
what I decided was I was going to get up starting on January 1st every day at before 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the first thing I was going to do was take a cold shower until I reached my goal. Well, I'll tell you what, I was standing there on January 1st after New Year's Eve parties at 5:59 in the morning, taking a cold shower. And all I'm thinking about is, I don't know how you sell life insurance to somebody on New Year's Day, but somebody is going to buy some life insurance from me today.
Yep.
And I mean, I went at it with a passion. Well, the end of the story, which is so instructive to me, and has been for my entire life, I reached that goal of $100,000 on February 17th.
Wow.
It took me about 7 weeks to reach an annual goal that I thought was absolutely impossible when I set the goal. And then, I learned some other lessons that year too, because I went into full goof off mode. I started spending money as if I was making $100,000 every 7 weeks. And
yeah.
things like that. I mean, I had to learn some lessons, but it didn't change the fact that all the time I was working full time, making $30,000 or $40,000 a year, what was inside of me was something so much greater. And all I had to do was make up my mind to achieve it, and it would take place. And so that's the lesson I learned back then. And it's a lesson that has paid me dividends, frankly, my entire life since then.
Yeah, it's such a cool story. And again, I've heard you share it several times, and that's why I wanted to make sure we gave you the chance to tell the story on the podcast, because it is. And, I've had similar experiences in my life and career where, you set this goal that, in your mind, initially, you don't think you have any shot at hitting it. But if you truly commit to it, you will find a way to do it. And like, I've been going through a challenge for the past, I guess, about 2.5 months. It's called the 75 Hard Challenge, and it's a physical and a mental challenge. And today, as we record this, I'm actually on day 74 of 75. But it's several different components. You have to do 2 workouts a day. You have to follow an eating plan, no alcohol, drink a gallon of water a day, a couple of other things like that. And it's really more than anything a mental toughness challenge, because to do each of these different components every single day for 75 days straight without, missing even one of them, it's a mental commitment. And I think the biggest thing it's taught me about myself going through this process is just simply to not negotiate with myself, right? Once I've set a goal, I'm going to do it. There's no excuses, right? I'm locked in on it mentally. And if I get to that point in my head, there's nothing that's going to keep me from accomplishing that. And it's been a great lesson for me. And I think I'll carry a lot of, what I've learned over the past 2.5 months, forward. But no, anyways, I love that story. So I appreciate you sharing it. I
love what I'm hearing about you with the 75-day challenge. Robert Schuller, famous public speaker, positive mental attitude guy, used to say, if you argue for your limitations, you get to keep them.
I like that.
And I love that saying, because it's what you just said, don't negotiate against yourself. Be whatever you can be. And all you got to do is make up your mind. Then you've got to have the discipline to pay the dues. To do it.
And it all starts mentally, right? I mean, I love reading about Navy SEALs and all of the experiences that they go through to become a Navy SEAL. And then once they're a SEAL, and, the recurring theme that you learn from those guys is it all happens in your head. Once you get there mentally, your body will follow, right? And in many cases, things that you would never imagine you could physically endure. But if you can get there mentally, everything else will kind of follow along and fall into place. And I know I've heard you say before that the book Think and Grow Rich was, instrumental for you, early in your career. It has been for me as well. But that's a lot of what that book talks about as well, which is, if you truly commit to it and believe it, then everything else will kind of just, follow suit and fall into place.
Exactly.
Yeah, good stuff. So let's shift gears back to franchising a little bit, because I mean, I can't think of a better person, to kind of have on the podcast to pick their brain when it comes to, just some of the best advice that someone who's interested in getting into business for themselves, maybe doesn't know a whole lot about franchising, but thinks that it could be an avenue that they'd like to explore a little bit further. So, over your career, I mean, literally at this point, thousands upon thousands of people have, found a great franchise business through working with you directly or indirectly through FranChoice. So what are some of the, I guess, biggest characteristics that would be relevant to someone that is actually ideal to be a franchise owner? Because I mean, not everyone's cut out to be a franchise owner. So, in your experience, who would be a great franchise owner and who may not be as well suited to own a franchise business?
Well, I think that first of all, if you consider yourself a true entrepreneur, you may not be the best franchisee,
Yeah.
because the reason people are attracted to franchising is the proposition that there can be a huge decrease in risk by getting a franchise versus starting an independent business. And the reason that you can potentially get this risk reduction is because the franchisor has worked out a methodology that they can teach you, and that it says basically, if you do this, then you have a very high chance of succeeding in our business, following our systems and doing what we tell you to do. Well, a true entrepreneur likes to make stuff up on the fly and do things by the seat of their pants, and
Yep.
they chaff under the idea that somebody else is going to tell them everything to do. This is the reason I was a bad franchisee when I started a video store business, because they would tell me to do something a certain way, and I go, well, no, I don't think that's the right way to do it. I'll do it some other way.
Yeah.
I can remember going through a training class where they told me, okay, we're gonna put 20% of the movies we're gonna put in the store are gonna be horror movies, and the bloodier the cover, the better. And I looked at this trainer, held up my hand, and I said, well, I'm sorry, but I don't like horror movies. I'm not gonna put any horror movies in my store. And the guy laughed, and he said, well, I so appreciate somebody who's willing to take a stance that's going to cost them all of the profit margin in their entire business. So
Wow.
instead of having a very profitable business, you're going to lose money. And I went, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, 40% of our rental comes from horror movies. These people rent a lot of them, and the more you got a knife dripping blood, the better off they're going to rent. And I
Yep.
thought, oh,
Oh.
okay, I guess we'll put horror movies in the store.
Yep.
And so, you just have to follow what the franchisor is saying in terms of a system. And when you're researching and investigating companies, and as a consultant, this, you're telling people this all the time, success leaves clues. You're
Mm.
looking for a track record of success in a franchise company. And so what you do is you do a complete thorough investigation, and you have to do it. The candidate has to do it, of a franchise opportunity, where you look at their track record, you look at things like, how have the franchisees been in terms of success,
Mm-hmm.
which is in the FDD, the item 20. You look at validation, you call a bunch of franchisees and find out if they're happy, if they're successful, if they
Yep.
do it again. And if you hear over and over and over again people saying yes, then guess what? If you become a franchisee, you're probably going to be happy, you're probably going to be successful, and you do it again. If you
If you
start
follow the
calling,
system.
yes, if you start calling franchisees, and half of them are unhappy and not doing well at all, then it's a coin toss. You got a 50-50 chance that you're going to be unhappy and not doing well at all. Well, I would steer clear of that one. And so, it's just common sense. You want to make sure that those support services exist,
Yep.
that they're delivered well, and that people who follow that system do very well. And if you find that in a franchise, then if you become a franchisee, you're probably going to do well too. It's just common sense, but a lot of people don't see that unless they have someone to help them figure out that, yeah, that's what it really boils down to.
Well, yeah, and I think it does take some self-reflection as well, because you not only have to validate that there is a good system in place, there's great support and resources, and that puts franchisees in a position to be successful. But then you also have to kind of look at yourself and say, all right, am I capable and willing of following the system and executing the way these other successful franchisees that I've talked to have done in their business? Because I get the question pretty often. Why would someone not be successful in a franchise? Because some people are actually surprised to hear that not all franchisees are successful, and a franchise organization is just like any organization. There's always going to be a bell curve, right? You're always going to have your top 20%, your bottom 20%, and everyone in between. And it sounds like a canned answer, but the answer is always, yeah, the bottom 20%, they simply don't follow the system. And there are plenty of franchisees out there that don't follow the system for their respective franchise. It still kind of blows my mind a little bit, why someone would invest in a franchise and then throw the model to the wind, but it happens. And, that's probably the predominant reason why a franchisee would not be successful. So I think your advice is good. If you're the type of person that's just so entrepreneurial, or for one reason or another, you don't like, following a system that's kind of laid out for you, you probably would be best to look at some options outside of franchising.
Well, I agree. McDonald's is a pretty successful operation, but if you went to McDonald's as a franchisee and said, I don't really like yellow, I think I'll make my arches pink,
Right.
uh, they're going to have a problem with that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good example. So, on kind of the flip side of that, for someone that is, confident that a franchise business could be the right avenue for them, what are some of the biggest criteria that you would look for in a franchise business, in terms of the business model? And that's going to vary depending on the individual and what they're really looking for in a business. But what are some of the biggest criteria that you would advise someone to look at, as they're evaluating a franchisor and the system that comes with that?
Well, that's a great question. And I think most people in my experience go about it exactly opposite of what I think is the best approach. They start by focusing on the product or service.
Right.
And I think the product or service that the business is delivering is the least relevant thing about any franchise opportunity. And I'll tell you why I mean that. When we work with people, what we try and do is start by spending some time visiting with them and figuring out, where do you want to go? Where do you want to get to? What result do you want in your life? And what's that look like? And then we start talking about the characteristics of business. Do you like to get involved hands-on in delivering a product or service to people? Or do you like to manage managers in more of an executive type business where you're more hands-off and other people are running at the unit level? We ask all kinds of questions about when they want to work. Do you like to work during the day on weekdays?
Mm-hmm.
Well, and so you never have evenings or weekends. Well, that's going to get rid of a lot of franchise opportunities where the cash register ringing at night or on the weekends. Yep. And so by exploring what people want, then what that does is it leads us towards certain opportunities that we know deliver those types of characteristics to the franchisee. Yep. So, and sometimes people haven't really thought through, if I get involved in a business and it's very successful, what do I want my life to look like 3 years from now? And that needs to be where the focus is, because that will lead you towards certain opportunities and away from other opportunities. And so, instead of looking at the quality of the beef in the taco or something like that in terms of the service or product of the business, focus on what's important to you and what result you want to achieve, and then use that as the prism to view opportunities to see, if nothing else, when you start doing validation, talking to existing franchisees, call the ones that have been in the business 3 or 4 years and ask them to describe their lifestyle to you and see if it matches up with the picture of where you want to get to. If
No,
it doesn't, this is not the right franchise.
absolutely. And it is. It's counterintuitive to the way most people would come into this process. They want to focus on, hey, I love ice cream, so maybe I should get into the ice cream business, and they don't really stop to think through, okay, well, what does my life look like as the owner of an ice cream business? Well, chances are you're not going to be spending the majority of your time just sitting around eating ice cream. There's going to be a lot of other responsibilities that you have as the owner of that business. They may or may not play to your skill set. They may or may not fit the lifestyle that you're looking for. And, I like to use an example when I'm having this conversation with people. Everyone's got a destination that they're trying to get in their life. A business is just a vehicle, right? And there's a lot of different types of businesses out there, just like there are a lot of different types of vehicles out there. And it's all about finding the best vehicle to get you to where you're trying to go. And that's different for different people. Different people have different destinations, different goals. And so the vehicle is going to vary depending on the person and where they're trying to get and what they're trying to accomplish. So I think when people can embrace that concept, and what I tell people too is it doesn't mean that, following the process this way means that you're just getting into any old business, never really evaluating the product or the service. Yeah, you want to make sure that whatever the product or the service is, you can be proud of, right? And you feel like it adds value to your clients, and it's not something that, you're going to be ashamed of or, lose sleep overnight because you don't feel like you're doing right by your clients. But that comes after you've identified these characteristics of the business that are so important. Then we can shift the focus a little bit to, what I like to call the widget, whatever the product or the service is, and find something that you are going to be able to get excited about and feel confident in delivering to your clients. It just shouldn't be the first filter that you're looking through. Um, so I love that advice. It's one of the biggest things I've learned, over my years being in franchising and affiliated in one form or another with FranChoice. And I think it truly is the best way to go through a process like this. So let's say that someone's got these characteristics of the business kind of outlined pretty clearly. At FranChoice, we call that a personal business model, right? So they've got their model. At that point, what are some of the biggest criteria that someone should be evaluating when it comes to different franchise opportunities? How are they going to kind of weigh, one franchise over another, assuming that the different franchises they are investigating kind of meet this criteria that we've already developed?
Well, I think that the most important thing, as we mentioned a minute ago, is to make sure that the existing franchisees in that system are happy and successful. But when you get down into the nitty gritty, there are other factors as well. And what I talk to people about focusing on is what does that first 6 months look like?
Mm,
How well does the franchisor help you? If it's a location business, find your location,
yep.
build it out. If it's an employee business, then how do they help you find the right employees and get them in there and get them trained properly? How successful are they in terms of helping you with the marketing? You got to do something to attract customers.
Yeah.
How good is their track record initially in terms of doing that? Now we're going to look at the long run too, but
Hmm.
but most important to me when I'm investigating the opportunity is how quick can they get me out of the starting gate and
Yep.
around the track?
That's right.
And so I've got a stable business that now I'm running. And because you've been a franchisee yourself, that first 6 months or a year is crazy. And
Yep.
then you kind of stabilize the business because you've built it up a ways, and then you can sleep at night again. But
Yeah.
but how well do they help you? How well do they train you? When you talk to existing franchisees and say, how prepared were you for the day you opened that business? And if they hold up their hands and say it was out of control, it was so unprepared,
Yeah.
that's not a good sign. That's not a good sign about their training. On the other hand, if they say, not only was I completely prepared, but the franchisor sent somebody out there for my opening who stayed for a week or two just to make sure that I remembered everything I was taught and to handle anything that came up. Okay, well, that's a totally different situation. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable now
Yep.
about something like that. You're paying a lot of money in initial franchise fees and ongoing royalty fees to take advantage of a system, but also, frankly, to help you get started right. so that you can get past that initial buildup period and have a stable business opportunity. And so you really need to evaluate how carefully and how thoroughly and how consistently they're able to help people get through that period and into that nice, stable, I got a good business, I can take a vacation now mode.
Right. Well, and the best way to learn that is through talking to other franchisees, as you've
Yeah.
mentioned. So I'm curious though, what advice would you give to someone that, may be looking at, more of what you would call an emerging franchise concept where there may not be as much of a track record or as many existing franchisees that they can validate with through this process? And there's different categories of emerging franchisors, companies at different points of their evolution. But there are, for some people, very attractive opportunities, but they're not going to have as much opportunity to validate with other franchise owners. How would someone adjust their investigation, if they are looking at a more emerging franchise concept?
Sure. Well, the secret is there are different kinds of people out there, and they feel differently about levels of risk that they're
Hmm.
comfortable with. Some people are what we refer to as early adapters. They love the idea of getting into a business that's more embryonic, that doesn't have as much of a track record. Other people, they are not, they are risk averse, and they want something like McDonald's, that's
Yep.
got a track record. Now, you have no flexibility as a franchisee in a company like McDonald's, but you also don't have much in the way of risk.
Right.
They've got this down to a science. And so there's a spectrum of opportunities that you need to evaluate. And for those people that are more comfortable with being an early adapter, what I would say is every franchise at the very least must have a prototype operation that their systems are based on. If you don't see that, if you just see somebody that says, oh, we've got a great idea, this is going to be wonderful, yeah, we don't really have a prototype, you're going to be the prototype.
Right.
I would steer away from it because frankly, you want to see some track record of success that you can evaluate, and then you want to be able to put yourself in the picture and go, okay, could I carry that off?
Yep.
What is necessary for a franchisee to be successful? Well, the less track record they have, the greater the potential risk is of getting involved in that franchise. So if the prototype is 1 unit, that's one level of risk. If the prototype is 11 units, they
Right.
built 11 company-owned stores and ran them for 3 years before they started franchising. Okay, I'm a little more comfortable with that
Sure.
because it's a little bit more of a track record. If they have 22 units in 3 different states, so they've actually tested some geographical things, they're not
Yep.
all right under their thumb, that's even a little bit better track record. And so you just have to evaluate it. And what will happen is you will determine, any candidate will determine what their relative comfort is in terms of a level of risk based on what they've learned during the opportunity. If you feel in your gut kind of queasy, like, yeah, I just don't know, I promise you it's not the right franchise for
Yeah.
you. If on the other hand you feel completely confident and you're excited and this may be it, then assuming they've got a track record and assuming you've done a good job of investigating it, not superficially but really dug
Hmm.
in, then it's probably going to work out very well. But trust your gut.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And for some of the more entrepreneurial minded, people that we talked about earlier, an emerging franchise concept could actually be a better fit because they are going to have a lot more leeway, to try different things, experiment with things. I mean, most good emerging franchisors, they learn a lot from those early franchisees, that came into the system. I was fortunate enough to work with an emerging franchise brand that, has really grown and become established as a national company now. And, some of those early franchisees, those very early adopters that were willing to, take a bigger risk. Not only are they some of the most successful franchisees in that system today, they've also just been so instrumental in helping the franchisor continue to develop their systems and processes. I mean, they've got programs in place that these other franchisees, these early franchisees, went out on their own, figured out how to do, and now it's a staple within that business. So, for someone that is a little more entrepreneurial minded, you would have to be a little more risk tolerant in a lot of cases, but there's pros and cons with everything, right? I mean, the pro of getting in with a emerging company is you got more upside. You get in early and this thing blows up, you could take it really big, and that's attractive to a lot of people.
Exactly. And you're right about learning from franchisees. The filet of fish sandwich, the Big Mac, these were invented by franchisees in the McDonald's system. They
Yeah.
weren't invented by corporate. And so, the corporate office is working with the franchisees to try and make the business better. I love that flexibility personally, but I've got other people that I've dealt with that have said, no, I want all the bugs completely worked out, and I want to have hundreds of people that have done it under the exact system that they're going to tell me to do and have done fine. Okay, listen, there's all different kinds of opportunities out there.
Yep.
Let's figure out what you're most comfortable with and then look at opportunities that match up well with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with a lot of different, even more mature franchise businesses, there's a fine balance, right? I mean, there's a system that should be followed because it's proven to work. But, one of the things I kind of coach people to get a sense of is, how rigid is the system? Are you going to still have some flexibility, to put your own touch on the business and approach it in your own, unique way? And in a lot of cases, that can be a good thing. I mean, I think about Shelf Genie, where we're franchisees. You talk to some of the highest volume franchise owners in that system, they're all following the same general model, but at the same time, they all have their own kind of, slightly different way of going about it and still getting great results. So to me, that's a win-win if you can have a great model that's proven to work, but also within that have the autonomy to, try different things and also just kind of put your own touch on the business as an owner. So one other thing I want to hit on, and I know that, you know, you're very busy, so I'm going to try not to keep you for too much longer, but I can't let you go without, hitting on some kind of current events that are going on right now. Cause, again, I can't think of a better person to get some insight on from this. You've been in franchising for, quite a long time at this point, and over your experience, you've seen a lot of ups and a lot of downs with the economy. You've seen some, kind of crazy times, 9/11, the Great Recession. And so you've, I think, got a very good perspective on how everything happening right now in terms of COVID-19, how has that impacted franchising so far? And what lasting implications do you see it potentially having on the world of franchising?
Well, I haven't been through a pandemic before, and I have certainly seen the economy go up and down any number of times from you know uh, shocking events like 9/11 or the first Gulf War, or things that just basically overnight shut the franchise development business down and
Yeah.
for some period of time, to things like the Great Recession and really '07 to '11 that I know officially it ended at the beginning of '09, but not really.
Yeah.
And that took a long time to recover from. I think that what we're seeing now is interesting and scary. It's scary because it's a health crisis in addition to being an economic, or at least potentially economic crisis.
Right.
We've never seen a pandemic in my lifetime anyway, and trying to deal with that and the fear and uncertainty that is associated with that. But the stock market went down 25% in what, a week or two,
Hmm.
back in March, and then it's come back up again.
Yeah.
Well, you watch business failures are exploding in businesses that are a very rough economic model to work in a social distancing world, and are just they're going to be difficult. I think if you think of restaurants, for example, a white tablecloth restaurant that has seating for 150 or 160, and then you tell them you can't ever have more than 30 or 40 customers in here. Well, how do they make that work?
Yeah.
I don't know. And so, there's some displacement. Unemployment has exploded. No one's ever seen unemployment explode like this before. Well, that's the bad news. The good news is that there's a lot of people out there that have been furloughed or laid off, or even if they're still working, are going, I really need to have more control in my life.
Yeah.
I need to be in a position where I'm not at the mercy of this kind of thing costing me my livelihood. And
Yeah.
but they're also smart enough now to look at the impact on different kinds of businesses and factor that into what they're looking at in terms of opportunities. We used to say at Great Clips, the beauty of this business is hair grows and it's got to get cut.
That's
And,
right.
and nothing changes that, economics or anything else. Well, what I learned is COVID-19 could change that a little bit, because if
Yeah,
the government shuts all businesses down, then hair's still growing, but it's not so easy figuring out how to get it cut. Well, now those businesses are reopened, and demand is, of course, exploding in them, but they're reopened in a basis that because of social distancing might be different. I mean, there's just a lot of uncertainty about that, and I don't know, when this runs its course over a year or two, if it's if coronavirus is going to become like the flu is, where every year we have a seasonal outburst of it.
hmm
A lot of people die from the flu,
yeah,
but we just everybody has ignored that for years and years and years, because it was just a background fact of life that you knew existed, but didn't really spend much time worrying about. Well,
sure.
maybe that's what will happen with the coronavirus. Maybe not. I'm not sure. But in any case, I think that the economic impact of explosive unemployment and the stock market, sooner or later the Fed's going to quit putting trillions of dollars in there to provide liquidity. I
Yeah,
think with all the business failures, it's going to go down. With the unemployment, we've got to. This is America. We've got to figure out a way to put these productive people back to work.
yeah,
And so I think businesses like the franchise business, with people being careful about the type of opportunity that they get, is going to, as it has in every other recession that I've experienced, businesses like franchise businesses have led the recovery,
yeah.
because they are Americans following the American dream of business ownership, going out and opening a new business, hiring people, and building up and being successful. And that's what has always taken us out of any tough times in the past, and that's going to be true again this time.
Well, it's so true, and I think the point you made earlier is very accurate. That this pandemic has opened a lot of people's eyes to the fact that as an employee, they don't really have any control over their livelihood. Because there's been a lot of people, in a very short period of time that lost their job or were furloughed, and it didn't have anything to do with them or their performance. Top performers that were big contributors to their company, they lost their job, and there's nothing that they can do about it, right? I mean, these are external circumstances that an individual has zero control over. And I mean, I know I've got neighbors that, are going through similar circumstances, and all of a sudden I'm getting text messages at 10:30 at night like, "Hey man, do you have some time to talk to me a little bit more about this whole franchise thing?" Because it's shifting people's mindsets, in that what most people always viewed as the least risky option is the corporate job with the steady salary, with the benefits, knowing how much money they had coming in every month, and doing something like starting a business. In most people's minds, that's way riskier, right? Well, now a lot of people, unfortunately, are learning the hard way that that's not actually the case. I mean, our businesses certainly slowed a bit during COVID, but we maintained a lot more control over our livelihood than we would have if we were employees working for someone else, right? We were able to pivot, we were able to make shifts, we were able to adapt quickly, put ourselves in a position to continue generating income. We certainly weren't going to lay ourselves off. That was never an option, right? That thought never even crossed our mind that we were just going to let ourselves go. So I just think that that's going to be a big shift, and a lot of people are, kind of taking this time to really reevaluate and figure out, how can they put themselves in a position where they have more control over their livelihood going forward. So I agree with you on that point, and I think another potential positive coming out of this is the stronger businesses will survive, and it'll kind of thin the herd in terms of the businesses that were not as well positioned and not really set up in an ideal way. That's being exposed a little bit more, which you hate to see businesses close, but at the same time, I think going forward, it'll really, the cream always rises to the top, right? So I think we're seeing some of that. And you look back at the last recession and some of the companies that came out of the last recession that are huge mainstream companies today, companies like Uber, Venmo, Zoom, even, some of these companies, they came out of the last recession. So I think, down times always create opportunity. And so I'm sure that we'll see some of that again with this. Well, Jeff, you've been fantastic. I really appreciate your time. If you can hang with me for, maybe 2 more minutes, I have a lightning round of questions that I like to ask every guest that comes on the podcast. So if you don't mind, I'd like to run through those with you real quick. But even before we do that, if you could spend just a second on this, because this is something that's so relevant with anyone that is considering getting into business for themselves, whether it's a franchise or not. And I know you have some great thoughts on this particular topic. So, what advice would you give to the aspiring entrepreneur that, because they're human, inevitably struggles with fear, uncertainty, and doubt when it comes time to take that entrepreneurial leap and make that life-changing decision to go into their business? What advice would you give to someone to, kind of push through that natural fear and uncertainty that comes with a decision like that?
Well, I think the best advice is just to be aware of your focus. If, as you're contemplating a decision about going into business, if you're focused on what you want your life to be like 3 years from now, if you're focused on the result you want to achieve, and you've done enough research to be confident that this vehicle, to use your term, that you're looking at will get you to where you want to go, trust me, there's going to be potholes in that road.
Yeah.
There's going to be ups and downs. There's no business owner that didn't have some ups and downs in there. But if you're confident, you've done the work and the research to know that this vehicle can get you where you want to go, then you're focused on whether or not is that really where I want to go. That will produce great decisions for you. If, on the other hand, your focus turns because of a natural tendency we all have to, if we're contemplating doing something outside of our comfort zone. If I've always been an employee, even a fairly successful one in the corporate world, and that's what I'm used to, and now I'm thinking about getting my own business, I trust me, at some level you're going to start experiencing anxiety and
Yep.
fear because it's the unknown. It's like every new job you've ever started. Day
Mm-hmm.
one, you're walking in there's a bunch of butterflies bubbling around
Oh, yeah.
because it's new, it's different, it's outside of your comfort zone. Well, if you allow that fear and that anxiety to become your focus, it will stop you from ever pursuing anything outside of your comfort zone. And that's, your comfort zone, as you probably learned in your life, it adapts all the time. As soon as you start doing something new, you start a new job or whatever, pretty quickly, your comfort zone becomes comfortable with it.
That's
And
right.
you're fine. The anxiety and the fear goes away. Same thing is true about starting a business. But I've seen many, many people that are dominated by a focus on the fear and uncertainty, on the anxiety, on, well, what could go wrong? What could go wrong? What could go wrong? And building that up in their mind until there's just all kinds of outrageous examples of something that could go wrong, that in spite of talking to 10 or 20 or 30 existing franchisees, none of whom ever had that thing go wrong,
Right.
they still are afraid that it might happen. Well, here's the deal. If you're going to be a business owner and you're going to be successful, you have to take risk.
Yep.
There's times when business owners, and on a fairly regular basis, they have to make decisions. That's really the most important role of ownership, is making decisions. And you never have perfect knowledge to make those decisions in.
Nope.
It's one situation after another where you go, okay, based on my experience, based on everything I've learned, based on my training, everything else, here's the way I think we need to go. And guess what? You may only be right 65% of the time, but 65% of the time will produce a very successful business.
That's right.
In most circumstances, you just need to be right more than you're wrong, or you need to understand what are the most important risk factors that you're making decisions on versus the unimportant ones. Well, if you get the unimportant ones wrong half the time, who cares?
Yeah.
But focus on the most important ones. And the other thing I will say, in addition to your focus, is make sure you're adequately capitalized. What we're seeing in the market right now is we're seeing a tremendous number of businesses that are probably never going to reopen because they were living out of the till. They
Yeah.
were living hand to mouth. They had no reserves at all because they had invested everything in the business, including all the debt that they could possibly get. Well, when you look at business opportunities, there's going to be different investment levels. Make sure that you pick one that has an investment level that leaves you with some reserves, that so that you can overcome situations that come up, which they
Yep.
always tend to do, and frankly, so that you'll still be able to sleep at night because you've got some reserves. And so if you stay on the right focus and you make sure you keep capital reserves, then I think you're going to be able to deal with fear and anxiety in a way that will get you toward your dreams.
Yeah. No, that's really great advice. And yeah, I think just trying to maintain your focus on the bigger picture, right? Why you started this process of exploring business ownership in the first place. A lot of people lose sight of that, as they get closer to having to make a decision. The fear and the doubt clouds that a little bit. So stepping back, remembering kind of your why, and then also thinking logically through the fear and uncertainty that's creeping up in your mind, because you're right, the mind can conjure up some outrageous fears that if you really sit down to think through it, the likelihood of any of that actually playing out in many cases is very slim. And you're right, you're always going to have to take a risk if you're looking to grow in life. It doesn't just involve getting into business for yourself, but the other thing I really encourage people to sit down and think through is think about the risk if you don't do this, right? So I like what you say, think about your life 3 years from now, if you do make this decision. But think about your life 3 years from now if you don't take this risk. What does that look like? Are you still in the same job where you're miserable? Are you still in the exact same place that you are today? And I think a lot of times if people honestly sit down and look at that, they'll realize that the risk of not doing anything is worse than the calculated risk of making that entrepreneurial leap. So it's just a shift in the way that you think about it, but really good advice. So appreciate you taking a minute to touch on that. So now to the lightning round, and then I'll let you go, I promise. But first question I like to ask every guest that comes on the podcast is, what is the best piece of advice that you've ever received? And that could be in business or just general life advice.
Well, I think the best advice I've ever received is to be humble and stay humble. And if you've made as many mistakes in life as I have, you've got plenty of reason to be humble. and but it's something that people appreciate it. And also I think live your life with gratitude.
Yes.
If you have a focus on gratitude, if you have a focus that says to yourself every day, uh, what are all the things I have to be thankful for? Then gratitude produces happiness,
Yep.
and you'll be a lot happier person. So I know those sound soft. It's not like hard business advice. They're just what I've learned. And I think one other thing I'll tell you, I had a mentor that told me what you have to understand about leaders is that good leaders serve.
Mm.
And boy, is that true.
Yeah.
People respect a leader whose motivation is about helping them. And if you
Well,
want
and
to
I
be a
think
leader,
that goes hand in hand with being humble too, right?
yes,
But no, I think that's all fantastic advice. Gratitude in particularly for me. I mean, since I've started really making that like a daily priority, part of my routine is to actually spend some intentional time, thinking about everything that I do have to be grateful for. It makes all the other problems that you're dealing with, it puts them in perspective. It's small potatoes in most cases compared to, everything in your life that you really can be grateful for. So I love that advice. Next question is, do you have any sort of a morning routine that you try to follow on a daily basis to set yourself up for a successful day?
I do. I'm an early riser. Unlike back when I don't take the cold showers
I was
anymore,
going
but
to
I
ask,
get
you still doing the cold showers?
no. But I get up very early, and the first thing I do is I drink a lot of water. I
Yeah.
drink a lot of water, and then I exercise about an hour every morning. I do the cardio stuff. I do
Hmm.
a lot of stretching, and then core stuff. Like leg lifts. I'm old school. But it makes me feel great. It makes
Yeah.
me feel ready for the day, And, so that gets me going.
Yeah. No, I love it. I'm big on hydrating in the morning. I love my coffee, right? But I'm never going to have my coffee until I've rehydrated. So a couple years ago, I started putting lemon juice, Himalayan sea salt, and a little bit of apple cider vinegar in a glass of water in the morning, mixing it up and chugging it down. And it's amazing. Like you can, as you're drinking it, you can feel it like replenishing your body because the sea salt replenishes a lot of the minerals that you naturally lose overnight while you're sleeping. And the lemon juice is good for you. It makes it taste a little better. And the apple cider vinegar kind of jumpstarts your metabolism. So I call that my morning cocktail. So that's like the
Wow.
first thing I do every morning is I slug down my morning cocktail. But it's like a small thing, but it's been a game changer for me. And I know when I get up and stretch and work out in the morning, I have so much more energy throughout the day and I'm more clear headed. So I love that. And I'm fascinated with how successful people start their days because there's definitely a theme with successful people. They have some sort of a routine that they try to stick to in the morning. It's different for different people, but they have some sort of a routine that they use to set themselves up for a successful day. So appreciate you sharing that with us. What book are you reading right now?
Um, well, I usually have more than one book going at a time, and I two kinds of books I like to read. The ones I call brain candy,
Yeah,
just they're just entertaining. They
sure.
serve no purpose at all. And others that I read to learn from. And right now I'm reading a Grisham book called Litigators that is just pure brain candy, but
Sure.
it's engaging and kind of a fun thing to do. And for learning purposes, there's a book that I've read every year for the last 40 years, and at least once, and called How to Win Friends and Influence People
Mm-hmm.
by Dale Carnegie. It's an
Yep.
old school book. I think it
Yeah.
was written 100 years ago, but it is one of the most important lessons that I've learned in life is in this book about frankly how to win friends and influence people is all about being focused on them rather than on yourself.
That's right.
And that's just a message that I can't receive enough. I feel great every time I read that book, and I'm reading it again right now.
Yeah, it's a great reminder. There's three books that I try to read once a year. That's one of them. Think and Grow Rich is one of them. And then there's a great book called The Power of Habit that for me is good to revisit at least once a year. But I'm a big nerd when it comes to reading. I keep a spreadsheet and track all the books that I read in a year. And then I put like a tick mark next to it if it's a reread. So I keep track of like how many times I've read a certain book. My wife thinks I'm a complete nerd, but um, it works for me.
I buy a
All
lot
right.
of books.
Final question for you, and then I'll let you go. What is your definition of freedom, and are you living it?
Well, sure. I think freedom is about having options. It's about your ability to make choices and to have the ability to make those choices and live with whatever the choices are. And so, whether you define that in terms of financial freedom or lifestyle freedom or associational freedom, who you
Mm-hmm.
spend your time with, I mean, these are all examples of what I think of when I think of freedom. And I think in that regard, I'm probably the most free person that I know. I do pretty much exactly what I want. I hang out with exactly the people I want to hang out with, and I've got the lifestyle that I want. And if I feel like any of those factors need to change, I just change them.
Yeah.
And it's one of the advantages of having been around a while is that you do get to the point where I think if you're smart, you just focus on that freedom and make sure you've got it. And I'm truly blessed because I am surrounded by absolutely the most wonderful people I've ever worked with in my work environment. Lots and lots of great friends in my social environment. And my wife and I love to travel and do things like that. And I've got a role that allows me to, well, up until coronavirus,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Not as
know,
much of that these days, but hopefully that'll
yeah,
change soon
it
enough.
has allowed us to be able to take the time and afford to travel around the world and have so much fun. So yeah, I mean, if there's a better life that I could have than the one I've got right now, I don't know what it would be.
No, I love that. And that, to me, that's what it's all about, right? I mean, freedom's different for different people, but I think the kind of common theme, at least for most of the successful people I talk to on the podcast, it all comes down to time, right? And having control of your time. And I love the way you put it, having control over your options. And that's in pretty much every aspect of your life. So well, no, look, I really appreciate it. This has been amazing. No doubt everyone that listens in is going to get just amazing value from everything that you shared. And I just wanted to take a quick minute to acknowledge you and thank you for everything that you've taught me over the years. You've taught me a lot more than you probably even realized that you have. So I really appreciate you. I'm thrilled to be a part of the FranChoice family. And thanks again for dropping into the Path to Freedom podcast with me today.
My pleasure, Wes.